these are pretty long cells that extend all the way from outside into the end, and they're fused to the cell membrane. And if you look at the different organizations, they're lined up because they're all kinds of long skeletal muscle stem cells.
Oh my gosh, there's still so much stuff to do. I'm so stressed. There's so many pathways, and like it's week 10. He's still lecturing on kidney stuff. Like I'm never gonna remember any of this because there's like a million things, and there's so many receptors, and like the final's in literally a week, and I can't do this. I can't get my heart's beating so fast. I'm so stressed. So.
Don't worry, I've got this. I have a stethoscope. I'm listening to your heart. Oh my goodness, you have tachycardia. Your heart rate's too fast. We need adenosine to suppress your pacemaker cells and slow down your heart rate.
Adenosine? What's that gonna do to my vasculature?
Well, I know I look like a very experienced doctor over here, but I really only know about frog physiology. And if you were a frog, adenosine would...
If you were a frog, you would be hung on the hook of an isometric transducer, and your aorta would be perfused with solutions containing adenosine, ADH, and histamine. The effects of these drugs on your vasculature would be measured using drip rate and rate of change of weight. Adenosine can bind to 4 different receptors, A1, A2A, A2B, and A3. In this lab, we observe the effects of adenosine binding to A1 receptors. When adenosine binds to A1 receptors in the arterioles, the GI pathway is activated, and beta-gamma subunits are released from G-alpha-I. These beta-gamma subunits activate the enzyme phospholipase C, or PLC, which converts PIP2 to IP3 and to DAG. IP3 binds to the IP3 receptor on the sarcoplasmic reticulum, releasing calcium ions into the cytosol. DAG activates protein kinase C, or PKC, which closes potassium channels and activates L-type calcium channels, resulting in an influx of calcium into the cell. Calcium binds to the protein calmodulin, which can then activate myosin light chain kinase, or MLCK. MLCK phosphorylates myosin using ATP and enables myosin head ATPase activity, causing smooth muscle contraction. The contraction of smooth muscle cells in blood vessels is referred to as vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction decreases the radius of the arterioles feeding into the capillaries. Throughout this study, physical properties of the fluid in the frog, including viscosity, were assumed to be unchanged, and the length of the blood vessels did not change. Therefore, according to the resistance equation, this decrease in radius results in an increased resistance of flow of fluid through the blood vessels. Because the funnel of the perfusion apparatus is kept at a constant height for each of the experimental conditions, the pressure difference along the tube does not change. According to Ohm's law, an increased resistance and constant difference in pressure result in a decreased flow. There is less space for fluid to move through the blood vessels, so the fluid travels at a slower rate. This explains the decrease in drip rate when the frog was perfused with the adenosine solution. The decrease in flow rate after treatment with the adenosine solution decreases capillary hydrostatic pressure. Decreasing capillary hydrostatic pressure decreases the forces pushing water out of the capillaries into the interstitial tissue. Because adenosine is assumed not to alter the physiological properties of the fluid, the osmolarity of the fluid inside the capillaries does not change, so capillary oncotic pressure does not change. No change is made to the fluids within the interstitial tissue, so interstitial hydrostatic pressure and interstitial oncotic pressure do not change. The filtration coefficient is constant because the permeability of the capillaries is unaffected by adenosine. Therefore, according to the Starling equation of ultrafiltration, decreasing capillary hydrostatic pressure decreases flux, resulting in less flow of water from the capillaries to the interstitial tissue. This was observed in the decreased rate of change in the weight of the frog. It's too much information, and it's like really overloading me, and my heart is like not great, and it's like not great.
Oh my gosh. She's gone. She's passed out. Oh my gosh. We need to get you some water. But you can't drink in here, so go pass out in the middle room. Now that it's safe, let's get you some water.
That's a good idea. Let me get my emergency water.
Wow, that's a lot of water. The first thing I think of when I see water as a physiology student is ADH, or vasopressin. ADH can conserve water in the kidney.
ADH? What's that going to do to my vasculature?
Well, if you were a frog, it would. ADH or vasopressin can bind to many receptors including V1, V2, and V3. When ADH binds to V1 receptors on smooth muscle surrounding arterioles, the GQ transduction pathway is activated and causes vasoconstriction. In the GQ transduction pathway, the G protein activates phospholipase C. This enzyme converts PIP2 to IP3 and DAG. IP3 binds to its receptor on the sarcoplasmic reticulum and releases calcium into the cytosol. DAG activates PKC, which stimulates L-type calcium channels and inhibits potassium channels. Overall, the GQ pathway increases calcium entry into the cell and decreases potassium exiting out of the cell. Thus, more calcium is available to bind to calmodulin. Calcium bound to calmodulin decreases the amount of MLCK that can phosphorylate myosin and cause ATPase activity at the myosin head for contraction. Vasoconstriction results in a decrease in radius, which increases the resistance in the vessel, according to the resistance equation. The increased resistance results in a slower flow rate, according to Ohm's law. Slower flow rate through the tissue decreases capillary hydrostatic pressure, which then exerts a weaker force on the capillary walls so that less fluid is pushed out to the interstitial tissues. Therefore, the frog gains weight at a slower rate, as reflected in the results. Though a slower flow rate through the arterioles would normally result in a decreased drip rate, the effect of ADH on V1 receptors located on efferent arterioles explains the observed increase in drip rate. Efferent arterioles carry fluid away from the glomerular capillary bed within a nephron. Constriction of these arterioles increases resistance and decreases the flow rate of fluid out of the glomerulus. Since more fluid remains in the glomerulus, capillary hydrostatic pressure increases and exerts a stronger force that pushes more fluid into Bowman's capsule within the nephron. This increase in fluid causes an increase in glomerular filtration rate, and the fluid eventually drips out of the frog. This was observed by the increase in drip rate after perfusion with the ADH solution.
Oh my gosh, look. There's a peanut in your water. That's so weird. It's a good thing you're not allergic to peanuts.
But I am allergic.
Oh shoot. That's probably why Professor Armour tells us not to bring food with nuts.
I can feel my throat closing and I think I'm getting hives. It's not great.
You know, histamine is released when you have an allergic reaction.
Histamine? But what's that going to do to my vasculature?
Well, if you were a frog.
Histamine is commonly known for its inflammatory response to allergic reactions. It can bind to 4 types of receptors, H1, H2, H3, and H4. When histamine binds to H2 receptors located on smooth muscle surrounding blood vessels, the GS transduction pathway is activated. First, the G-alpha-S subunit separates from the G protein and stimulates adenylyl cyclase to convert ATP to cyclic AMP, which stimulates pKa. pKa reduces the activity of MLCK, which phosphorylates myosin, and activates MLCP to remove phosphate from phosphorylated myosin. Myosin must be phosphorylated in order to bind to actin and initiate ATPase activity at the myosin head to cause contraction of smooth muscle. Activated pKa also causes potassium channels to open and release potassium out of the cell, resulting in hyperpolarization. Then, voltage-gated L-type calcium channels close since the cell is no longer depolarized. This closure prevents calcium from entering the cell and binding to calmodulin, which then decreases the amount of MLCK that can phosphorylate myosin and cause contraction of smooth muscle around the arterioles. Blood vessels relax and dilate. According to the resistance equation, the increase in radius decreases resistance. A decrease in resistance causes increased flow according to Ohm's law. This was observed by the increase in drip rate when histamine was used as the perfusate. Since the binding of histamine to H2 receptors causes vasodilation and decreased resistance, the increased fluid flow generates greater capillary hydrostatic pressure. According to the Starling equation of ultrafiltration, this pressure pushes water from inside the capillaries into the tissue, causing edema and weight gain in the frog. This was observed by an increase in the rate of weight gain when histamine was perfused through the frog compared to the control. Additionally, the rate of change in weight increased dramatically as compared to the changes observed when adenosine and ADH were compared to their respective control trials. It is likely that histamine caused a change in vascular permeability to allow for faster exchange of fluid across the vessel walls. Studies have shown that histamine increases the permeability of vasculature through nitric oxide-dependent mechanisms. This would increase the filtration coefficient K in the Starling equation of ultrafiltration and amplify the rate of change in weight as noted in the results.